Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by managing editor Ross Binder and publisher Adam Jacoby here on this Monday morning, this MLK Day. Before we get started, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, drop a like, drop a comment here on YouTube. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review and subscribe so you don't miss an episode there as well. So, Iowa women, five straight losses. They dropped that game to Oregon, Big Ten conference game to Oregon last night in Eugene, 50 to 49. Quite a low scoring matchup. Adam, who of course is on our women's beat, you covered that one. From what I saw on Twitter, I wasn't able I think I've talked about this before. I only have so much bandwidth in my brain to cover all of the Iowa women's sports. I don't know how some beat writers do it. But I wasn't able to watch, and I saw it was like a 27 to 12 lead before half, and then they lost. So tell us what happened here, Adam Ross. I know you watched it too. So yeah, tell us.
Well, Elliot, it was, and you guys know this is my favorite phrase of all time, a tale of two halves. And Iowa led by 10 at the half, and it really, really could have been 12 at the half. But Lucy Olsen's sort of desperation shot at the end of the shot clock, they reviewed it at the halftime break, found out that it came right at the end of the whistle or at the end of the shot clock. If you freeze it, you can see that it was a violation. And those 2 points ended up being very important because in that second half, after Iowa took a very, very early 13-point lead, the offense just stagnated is the word that Jan Jensen used, and the term I would use is drove into a cliff because it was just they completely shut down. Ended up, like you said, with just 49 points after leading by 15. And when you hold your opponent to 15 or to 50 points, a 15-point lead at any point in the game should be a dominant position. And the offense just cratered at that point. And a big part is Lucy Olsen, the ballyhooed transfer who went 0 for 7 in the second half, 0 for 12 for the game, five turnovers, 4 points. She played decent defense. She rebounded, she passed. It's not like she just showed up and opened up a folding chair and said, "All right, guys, go play." There was a lot of effort, and when you watch this team play, there is effort for 40 minutes, but they're pressing. And when that shot doesn't go in, you can see that it seems like the pretty much the entire team reacts negatively when Olsen's shot isn't starting to go in. And that's a little bit of a distressing sign. One, because you want, your point guard, your leader, and all that to be productive. But also, too, you want a little bit more mental resilience out of the players that would need to step up in those situations. And the overarching theme for this year's team is just a parade of inconsistency, and it starts with the upperclassmen. And you can't really point to anyone on this team who's just had themselves a good season yet, especially among the underclassmen or among the upperclassmen. You can't find one at that point. And in the Big Ten, as competitive as this league is, and with just enough little bad luck, that's how you get a five game losing streak without ever getting blown out.
And
Yeah,
oh,
go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Adam.
Ross. Nope, you go.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna echo what Adam was saying, and that this team has just been completely unable to find any sort of consistency, especially from the juniors and seniors on this team who are obviously being relied on to lead the way and carry the heavy load for scoring and playmaking and everything. And they've just not been able to do that this season. It's just been Seydou Traore had a good game yesterday. Overall, she was probably the best player on Iowa's team. Had I think 10 points and a career high 15 rebounds. So she was definitely attacking the glass. But yeah, the shooting has just not been there, and the turnovers have been sky high. I know in the second half, the third quarter, Iowa had 9 points, which is meager and miserable total by itself, and also 8 turnovers in that quarter. So a 9.8 turnover quarter is that's how you can see a 15-point lead, go sideways basically. And then in the fourth quarter, they only scored 8 points. So, 17 points for a half is just not that's a low scoring, poor scoring half of high school basketball. And to do that in the Big Ten that is how you wind up, losing a game you once had totally in control with a 15-point lead. And like Adam said, it's a result of the offense stagnating. It's a result of just turnovers skyrocketing and the inability to get good shots and obviously to make good shots or any shots at this point.
Who would have thought in talking about Iowa women's basketball that offensive stagnation would be a problem? Even in Jan Jensen year one and post Caitlin Clark year one, with Lucy Olsen on this team and her ability to score the basketball, and obviously that went completely sideways at one point or another yesterday. If I'm remembering correctly, Lucy was kind of the only consistent part of the offense for a little while there in her mid-range jumper. So I guess, is this a situation of the yips? Is this a situation where, I mean, it's a long season. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, if there's anything like the yips on this team, you're going to see that in Olsen because the game prior to this was the overtime loss to Nebraska at home, and in that game, in the second half, I think in the fourth quarter, as a matter of fact, Lucy Olsen went 1 for 6 from the free throw line, and all five of those misses, which were in the fourth quarter, were in a row, and she had never missed more than 3 free throws in a game in her college career, much less 5 in a row, much less 5 and a quarter, right? And that sort of yip situation is how that game even got into overtime in the first place. And to add injury to insult at that point, overtime is where Hannah Stuelke suffered a concussion and then couldn't make the West Coast trip. And boy, the team really needed Hannah Stuelke on offense against Oregon on Sunday. So, just this sort of cascading fall of, negative things to happen. But yeah, it looks like the yips, at the free throw line, certainly, because after the game, Olsen comes out and, with a trainer and just starts shooting free throws. And uh, we saw her miss two over about 10 minutes at that point. And, none of those count on the scoreboard, right? It doesn't change the fact that they had just lost to Nebraska, but it tells you that there is a little bit of a disconnect between what's happening during the 40 minutes of competition and what they're capable of doing during those, outside of those 40 minutes, what they're capable of doing in practice, what the staff believes that they're capable of doing. And so when you have that disconnect between practice, production and game production, yeah, you look at the yips, you look in between the ears at that point. And certainly a staff like Iowa's, understands that it's a little bit tough rowing when you're trying to get somebody's confidence back up, and it's especially tough during a 5-game losing streak. But it doesn't look, at the very least, like the team has gotten down, that the team is packing it in, that the team is, sort of not wanting to compete as much at the very least, because again, we're talking about all single digit losses here, including to some good teams, including to Maryland, including to Michigan State. So clearly they're competitive. Clearly they're trying to win. Like Jan Jensen said after the game, like, we know that they're not missing the shots because they want to miss the shots, right? So Yeah, yeah, yips sounds about right to me, which is not going to be satisfying for any Iowa fans who want to, see that this team is doing better, who wants to see them go back to the tournament. But if there were an easy way to get out of that, they'd be out of it already, it seems. Ross, you watching this team, obviously, you can see that this is not the same offense as when Caitlin Clark was running the show, but I guess what jumps out to you in terms of what you've seen and where these things sort of, veer sideways to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, a lot of it is mental. It is just that, there's a lot of pressing going on by the players. The effort is not in question, but with what they're doing out there, they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves to make shots and make plays, and it's not happening. But from a X's and O's standpoint, I do think they're having a tough time getting good shots. I think the ball movement has been slow at times, especially that second half against Oregon. Like they're having a difficult time getting open shots and getting good looks. And part of that is because the ball just isn't moving quickly a lot of the time. It's not whipping around the perimeter or coming in and out quickly. It's getting stagnant. Well, like Jan said, it's getting stagnant. It's getting stuck with not any one player in particular, but just there are just times where the ball just isn't moving where it needs to be and as fast as it needs to be. And that is winding up with players taking not optimal shots, shots at the end of the shot clock, time running down, like, oh, I got to get a jumper up. It's like, well, that's probably not going to be a good shot. So, and it's not, and it doesn't go in. And then that's how you wind up in these, long scoring droughts. So
Nine
is that,
minutes in the second half for Iowa,
yeah,
a 9 minute
yeah,
scoring drought.
yeah.
Amazing that you can't win Big Ten games that way.
Yeah, basically an entire quarter without scoring a point. That is dismal. But is that kind of what you've seen too in terms of like the ball movement or things along those lines?
It has been inconsistent, and that is the sort of thing that drives a coach crazy because I don't think that you can point to anyone who's had an objectively bad season thus far. I mean, obviously, especially with the deep shooting, you want to see more out of Kylie Fierbach. You want to see more out of Lucy Olsen. You want to see more out of Tegan Mullaney because all three of those players, were sort of expected to help, stretch the defense a little bit more. And yet, they're making three-pointers at about a 25% clip. And that's the sort of situation where a defense doesn't have to respect that shot. And we saw a little bit of that at the beginning of the season. Iowa started to get that shot back. It has started to disappear again, and defenses know it. And so, even against Nebraska in that first half, you started to see the defense just sag completely off Stuelke as soon as she got the ball on the perimeter because they weren't afraid of her shooting that ball. And it was the exact same junk defense that Iowa played against South Carolina in the Final Four 2 years ago. That Bluter masterclass on defense where they just sagged straight off the perimeter and said, "All right, beat us that way." And South Carolina didn't know what to do. That was Hannah Sulky with the ball in her hand on the perimeter and her defender sagging about 10 or 15 feet off her. And then, like, well, I know I don't want to shoot this, but am I going to dribble drive, 20 feet to someone who has to back up five to defend me? And so it's, tough going for Stuelke, but ain't no fun when the rabbits got the gun. And now that opposing defenses know how to shut down what Iowa wants to do, how to get Iowa out of its comfort zone, this is where the tough part of the coaching job comes in for Jensen, for Raina Harmon, et cetera, in getting these girls, back into running a cohesive offense. Because right now they're just not there yet. Yeah, they miss Stuelke quite a bit. Stuelke provides a lot of playmaking, a lot of gravity, just for other defenders' attention. We talk about the gravity that Caitlin Clark had when the ball was in her hands. Stuelke obviously is not on that level, but at the very least, she is enough of a threat that the other three players on the floor, when she's on there with Olsen, um, can operate sort of independently outside of that attention from the defense. And that's where you see this team that's just been mostly role players for their career really thrive when defenses aren't keying on them.
With all of what we've been talking about here said, I guess what my read of this is that all of the freshmen have been very impactful, maybe minus Callie Levin, forgive me.
Levine.
Levine. Why I didn't
Yeah.
even get it right either time. Levine, she hasn't really seen the floor much this year, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and she's the only one out of the five at this
Okay.
point, and I think a lot of it's just the senior backload at guard that isn't really there on the wings, for
Okay.
example.
So a lot of playing time for those four freshmen. And I've heard a lot of good things, but there's also you have to learn how to be a college basketball player, right? I know the turnovers have been notable. Um, and then you look at this group ahead of them that have been around Caitlin Clark for however many years, who is a generational talent, completely changed the game, all of that. And it's a compliment where you'd hope that maybe the upperclassmen would be a little bit more aggressive, whereas the younger ones would be a little bit more it's just it's a dynamic that is not it's not it's just not currently working
Conducive.
clearly.
Yeah,
It's just to put it into layman's terms. And I think it all culminates in the fact that what did I put in the outline? What did we talk about in the thread? What did you mention in your recap the other night, Adam? Is Jan Jensen was asked who's the leader of this team, and she says Aaliyah Guyton.
yeah,
And I think that says a lot about Aaliyah, one, in a really positive way. I mean, she's been awesome too, from what I've seen. Really confident, hit some big shots. But at the same time, where's Sita Fulter? Where's uh I mean Kylie Fierbach? Where Hannah Stuelke doesn't strike me as such because she's a little bit quieter, but Addie O'Grady strikes me as a little bit quieter too. But where is this senior leadership position right now? The word I was looking for
Well,
a moment ago was cohesiveness. Go ahead,
yeah.
Ross.
I say that's exactly why they went out to get Lucy Olsen. Like she is supposed to fill that void, like the scoring void and the leadership void. She was the third leading scorer in Division 1 last year. She's a senior. She is, played a lot of basketball for Villanova prior to this season. Like she has the reps, she has the experience and the ability. And, that's who Iowa was bringing in to be that focal point and that leader. Because like you said, this is a team of role players last year. And so, expecting them to take on, they were expected to take on bigger loads this year and more responsibility, more playmaking, more leadership, etc. But I don't think that it was never going to be the plan for them to, do everything. You needed that spark plug and that dynamic leader, which is supposed to be Olsen, but she is mired in just an atrocious shooting slump right now in Big Ten play. She's barely hitting, I think, 30% over her last 5 games or something like that. And, it's just been crippling to Iowa's offense, essentially. So without, that leader at the top, there just isn't it's a very amorphous and just kind of nothing can really solidify where it needs to especially in crunch time situations where I think we've seen Iowa really struggle in this losing streak because 4 of those 5 games, I believe they had leads in the fourth quarter and were unable to finish out with a win. The late game execution just hasn't been there, especially on offense. The getting stops has been an issue at times. Like Nebraska ended the game the other night, I think, making like their last 6 or 7 shots, something like that. Like they were
They
just,
made 9 in a row in the fourth quarter. Nebraska
yeah,
did just to
like,
force overtime while Iowa couldn't hit free throws. Yeah,
yeah,
continue. Sorry.
they were insanely hot, but there's just been a lot of just poor late game execution for Iowa, especially on offense. And it's hard not to think that comes down to just that lack of, upperclassmen leadership. And, especially, again, that's where the Iowa's relying on those players. And right now they're just too far in their heads, it seems, to really get the results they need.
If I can
Yeah,
interject
this
here before
go
you
ahead.
go, Adam, am I wrong when I felt like a lot of people kind of anointed Sid Folter as the next Kate Martin, as the next, leader of this team, the glue, so to speak? What is that just not who she is? Did the fan base get that wrong? And I don't mean this to be a criticism of Sid. It's just surprising to me from, whatever it is, 1,000-foot view as somebody who doesn't cover the team. Um, it's just a little surprising to me. I would have pegged her as the next one to step up and lead the team.
Well, in the full answer that Jensen gave, when she was asked about the leader, and the first person she said was Aaliyah Guyton, just straight out. In the full answer, she says, Sid tries, but Aaliyah has this natural gift of knowing that you just move on to the next play. Like, okay, that didn't go in, on to the next one. And that sort of tells me that there's a whole lot of players on Iowa's team that don't really have that mental toughness. And it's Jensen called it rare, especially for a true freshman, to have that sort of competitors like next play up mindset. And if it's rare to her, that sort of tells me that this is a situation where as soon as the shots stop, going down at a 68.8% rate as they were when they built up that 15-point lead, as soon as the jumpers start clanging a little bit, how do you respond to that? Do you respond with better defense? Do you respond with making sure that you're making the extra pass? Or do you just say, all right, on to the next play, what do we need? And it sounds like Guyton has that, all right, what do we need mindset. And a lot of the upperclassmen are sort of pressing, is the word that Jensen uses a lot. And you also start to see, and a Fulter, to your point, Eliot, when she's available in post-game comments after losses, and often she is, there's a little undertone or undercurrent of trying to lead her teammates back, and so it manifests itself in ways saying like, hey, yeah, we just sort of need to trust our offense and not take quick shots after we didn't get a stop, which is a nice way of a teammate saying like, hey, don't put your head down, like don't shoot with 18 seconds left if we're not getting stops, if we're in the middle of a run, right? Because the easiest way to make sure that a run against you keeps up is to give the ball back within 10 seconds. And so that sort of tells me that this is a team that doesn't really trust the reads that they are supposed to make in this offense. And some of that is just different roles, like you've mentioned, Eliot. Some of it is that Lucy Olsen hasn't been here very long. Some of it is, Sita Folter was out for some of practice with getting her knee cleaned up, and so was Hannah Stuelke. Although, fortunately, we haven't really heard that excuse much out of Jensen much. I think everybody in that office understood that there was a expiration date on that excuse, but it is still valid. I think just nobody wants to hear it at this point. But yeah, they've got to figure a lot out. They've got to start working together better as a team. Uh, it really does sound like a Fulter is trying to get that exact point across about Olsen in the press without calling anybody out, because that's not productive, right? Not for a coach, not for a teammate or anything like that. That's not productive. But there's a lot of like, hey, we have to keep our confidence up. Hey, we have to take better shots. Hey, we have to keep moving the ball. Hey, we can't throw that pass. And that sort of criticism feels like it's a little bit levied at Olsen, but it's also at Feuerbach, who has seen her minutes decrease. It's also at a Folter, who is guilty of as many of those ill-advised passes into the post as anybody on this roster. Some of it is Stuelke, who can look lost at times, and certainly seems capable of being that like sort of phase in and out of the game sort of mentality a little bit. Some of it's O'Grady, who can't really handle inside posts or post passes if there's somebody on the backside who's going to, sort of break that up. She doesn't really have that the hand strength. She doesn't have that like I'm catching it here, I'm turning and I'm putting it up, right? That she still doesn't have that. I mean, I don't want to call it just hand strength, but we've seen so many balls just sort of bounce off her hands over her entire career to the point where it's like, all right, stop asking her to do that. So it's this like miasma of everybody being inconsistent. And then it's true freshmen who are by their own nature inconsistent, right? Because they're still learning about what college basketball even is at this point, unless they're, one of the top five freshmen in the nation. And surprise, none of these girls are. So there's so much for them to figure out. And game to game, it's never really clear who the best player on this team is. And that can look like really nice depth when you're 17-2. When you're 12-7, it seems like a problem. So they've got a lot to fix. They are still competitive. And, even going back to that 2012, 2013 team that lost five straight, they still made the tournament, right? They went from 5-2 to 5-7 in the Big Ten. So the season's not over. You can still make the tournament with seven losses, eight, nine, or 10 losses. This is a team that if they get to the Big Ten tournament at 18-12, let's say, they're still in that mix. A lot, still has to shake out, but they've got to figure something out too. They got to start playing together better real soon.
Speaking of playing together better real soon, men's basketball. Things are quite down in the dumps between both of these programs right now at Iowa. The Hawkeyes coming off a trip to LA, the men, and back-to-back losses to USC and then UCLA, and a couple staggering statistics Ross and I were talking about, and that I've referenced a few times when just talking to people about Iowa basketball in writing about this recap for the UCLA game. In their three losses these last 2 weeks to Wisconsin, USC, and UCLA, they've allowed at least 94 points. And the opposing team has shot 62% from the field. That's three losses in 2 weeks. Three losses in one season like that is bad. Three losses like that in 2 weeks is awful. To Big Ten competition, Wisconsin, who looked really good at the start of the season and has had some good wins. USC, who has started to make an upward, they're on an upward trajectory. And UCLA, who had just lost four in a row to original Big Ten teams, fresh off a trip across the country from Rutgers, and they come out and score their first nine baskets, 9 of 9, and to a team that was averaging 67 points in Big Ten play in UCLA. And I think the most important thing to note here when talking about these losses, they're gonna haunt Iowa. If it's them versus somebody else on the bubble, you go with the other program that doesn't allow these horrid statistics defensively. Am I wrong when I say that? Ross, I'll go to you here first here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to guess at how granular the committee is going to look at things like that necessarily, but it has a really negative impact on Iowa's overall stats, obviously. Like this hurts their KenPom rating, it hurts their net rating. These are not positives when you're getting, torched on the defensive end side of the ball and, losing a bunch of games. So from that perspective, yeah, it is definitely going to be very harmful. And the defensive numbers are just staggeringly bad. And it's hard to say surprising to me. Like, I've watched this Iowa team for a long time and under Fran, and, obviously defense people have been, pounding that since he got here practically, in terms of just, he's a more offensive focused coach. That's the way they've played, obviously. But going back to what I was saying, like at the start of this season, it did seem like there was some progress on the defensive end. Thelwell has been a great addition on that side of the ball. And it seemed like there was some renewed commitment from, other players as well on that end. And it's obviously you can't I can't feel that way after these last 2 weeks and giving up 94 plus to three different opponents and seeing them make almost two-thirds of their shots and UCLA starting that game making 9 shots in a row. Like on one hand, it's just like this is unlikely, but on the other hand, it's like it's Iowa. This is kind of what they do at this point, unfortunately.
What did I say? What did I say? Fool me once,
Yeah.
shame on, what is it? Shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me three times, shame on both of us. This is a trend now. This isn't one game fluke. This isn't, Peyton Sanford can't come out post game and say, yeah, Wisconsin had their best game. We had our worst game. Well, statistics bear out that this is something that's continuing. And if they weren't up, what was it, 57-24 at half, UCLA would have scored over 100 points.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
UCLA called
that was
off.
sportsmanship by Mick
Yeah.
Cronin, straight up.
Yeah, they called off the dogs a bit in that second half because they had destroyed everything in their path in the first half, so there was no need to be cruel.
The closest it got in the second half was 23 points.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's sad when the team loses 94-70 and you say, well, that is deceptively close. But that is how you describe that game. That first half against UCLA was one of the worst exhibitions of basketball I've seen by a team that was ostensibly still playing for something like a Big Ten tournament. That is, well, one, it's the largest halftime deficit of Fran's career at Iowa. And Ross, you and I are old enough to remember there were some oogly teams as they were getting out of the shadow of the Todd Licklider era. But that looked like Licklider ball against UCLA. And it is the bad defense is surprising insofar as Drew Thelwell is on the team, right? Like we've seen him anchor a lot of like really good stretches of defensive play by this team. We know they're capable of better, but that first half against UCLA, they looked like they didn't want to be on the court. They looked perfectly happy to get run off it. And it's not like Pauley Pavilion was, you know, chocked full to the gills with people who were, like nobody really in LA even really cares about basketball right now. It is at best a fifth like level concern for everybody in that area. And yet Iowa gets on that court and just gets run off the floor by the Bruins. Doesn't look competitive against USC for much of the game either. Um, yeah, it's a little bad when your team is sort of the slump buster for other teams' jump shooting. Uh, you know, and some folks who are as old as I am know where that term really comes from. And yeah, it is a little bit that ugly for Iowa basketball right now.
I
But
mean,
it bears it
UCLA
out.
UCLA was one of the worst shooting teams in the Big Ten, in Big Ten games. So that's, 5, 6, 7 games prior to Iowa. And like Eliot said, they hit their first 9 shots. Like, there is nothing that cures a bad shooting team in the Big Ten right now better than playing the Iowa defense, essentially. Like, that is the fix.
So to that end, one more little stat here, Elliot. Um, Not surprisingly, in Big Ten play, uh, opponents are shooting 43% against Iowa from deep, which is the worst in the Big Ten. But on two-pointers, at the very least, opponents are shooting 60.5%, which is also dead last in the Big Ten. Their effective field goal percentage for opponents against Iowa is 61.9% EFG. Like Iowa's shooting 58 or 57.8, which on offense is the best. And that's still 4 percentage points lower than what their defense is giving up. Like this is a team that's getting just railroaded every time they walk on the floor. And you have to figure something out defensively like that. All right, Elliot, sorry, I had to bring things down even more before you talk
Yeah,
again, Elliot. Sorry.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
The thing is too, one thing we repeatedly heard on the broadcast the other night, when, that's when just the announcers are just trying to talk about something, is that this was the number one offense in the country, and they scored whatever it was, 27 points at 24 points at halftime.
Yeah.
So this isn't, I hammered the drum. Defense, defense, defense. Allowing 57 points at halftime is atrocious. And allowing those previous statistics that we've mentioned, awful. But where's the offense in this game, too? Josh Dix went 7 of 11, 5 of 7 from three, finished with 19 points. Owen Freeman was the next closest. He only played 21 minutes, scored 11 points, and only finished with three rebounds. And Iowa finished with 19 rebounds on the game. Um, there's just this issue of obviously the defense is the problem, right? Like if you had to blame one thing, it's defense. Drew Thelwell has had his impact there, but Owen Freeman's the anchor, right? He can't be inconsistent. He has to be consistent down there. He can't get in foul trouble. Um, and then you go to Brock Harding, who we know is small, and now opposing defenses are starting to hunt him on switches. You get a big guard in that matchup, and they're just going to own Brock Harding all night. To me, that was a big problem and a big reason why I was saying Drew Thelwell's your starter at point guard when he came in. Why I was beating that drum. Why you bring Brock Harding off the bench. But I don't know that Fran is going to be willing to do that at this point, especially in the season. He doesn't tend to, at least from what I've seen, he doesn't tend to bench guys who he started for a good contingent of the season. He tends to roll with those lineups, even if it's killing him, even if it's killing the defense, what I was running with. Additionally, Peyton Sandford gets hurt in this game, but they were already down a lot. Like you can't point to, oh, Peyton got hurt, things went sideways,
Yeah.
right? So that's a problem. I mean, Seydou Traore played 20 minutes in this game, which is probably a good thing. I would have liked to seen him more on the floor just to finally get him in some sort of rhythm because you're gonna need him defensively. You're gonna need him in that press. You're gonna need him to guard opposing teams' best players if it's not Josh Dix, if it's not Drew Thelwell. So a lot of things just aren't working right now. But you throw in the fact that Peyton has trouble getting going in the first half. I mean, you're just not like to have that type of a first half and then not play in the second half. I mean, um, the second half Sanford thing is fun for a few games, but if you're going to be down like this in the first half continually and have to rely on that, it's going to come back to bite you in the ass, right?
Well, that's absolutely. And that's kind of what I was going to point out was, one of the commonalities that we've seen from Iowa over the last couple of weeks has been really terrible starts to games. And this kind of gets back to what you're saying about, Fran changing the starting lineup. I think this is a strong argument to make a change to that starting lineup because you starting this five, which, there's been a little change because Delwell missed a game and yeah, et cetera. But, you're starting these guys and Iowa has been getting off to horrible starts. Like Wisconsin buries them pretty early. The Nebraska game, they ended up winning, but Nebraska had a great first half, stuck Iowa in a deep hole. And, that was the start of the second half Sanford thing where he, just went crazy in the second half and Iowa was able to pull that game out, but not a good first half by Iowa at all. Indiana is the exception there. They actually, I think, started pretty well there and, had Indiana, at a decent point.
There's another team that just didn't want to be there too.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were not locked in by any means. And then these last two games, they got down big early to USC. There was some good fight back there. Obviously couldn't come back all the way. And UCLA, like the worst of the bunch, like buried from the jump, never in the game, just never ever anything. It's like if you're consistently starting bad, you've got to do something. You can't be going into the second half and like, okay, we're down 10, we're down 15. We got to outscore this team by, 15 points in the second half. Like that's not a viable strategy to win more than one out of 10 games probably. Like that's just not going to happen.
You can't say, "Oh, Peyton, we you got to score 30." Josh Dix, you got to score 30.
Yeah.
That is not sustainable.
Yeah, you mentioned that Brock Harding was starting to get hunted by defenses, and that the size was starting to play an issue. And frankly, it's the exact same dynamic that we saw with Jordan Bohannon during his 15-year Iowa career. And a big part of what made, Bohannon viable to be on the floor was the fact that he was a great three-point shooter. Harding is better than last year as a three-point shooter. That I'll give him that, but you have to be able to provide a whole lot more on offense to when you are that much of a defensive liability. And that is not only a like, well, that's going to help guard score, but especially in modern defenses, when you have a weak link on the perimeter, and we know that that weak link is not Josh Dix, right? We know that it's not Peyton Sanford, but when you can't keep the guy with the ball in front of you, especially as a one, all of a sudden that puts pressure on everybody behind you on defense, up to and including Owen Freeman. And so many times in these big stretches, a lot of these buckets that opposing teams are getting are at the rim. They're layups, they're dunks. I mean, UCLA was just having a party at the rim, and so much of that is because Freeman, he ends up being the scapegoat because he's the guy that's standing near the bucket when that dunk happens. But so much of it is because he has to rotate off his guy. Otherwise, it's just going to be a free layup for the guy that I almost called him Bohannon again, that Harding couldn't guard. And so you see that's where those breakdowns start to happen, and that's where in Iowa's really tough defensive teams in the Bohannon era, it was also like now we have to rotate, and Iowa got victimized on the perimeter by kickout passes in those eras.
Oh, sorry. I was going to let you
Yeah.
finish your point, Adam.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I interject.
And we're seeing it more at the rim here, but also on kick out passes by teams this year too. But it really all starts with the defense at the point of attack. And Harding is kind of not really that guy yet. Eliot, you've got something.
Owen is not without sin, so to speak, here
Yeah.
either. The press that they were running the other night when they started to make that, try to mount that comeback against USC, Owen was out on the perimeter and I didn't see him recover one time. And what did that result in? Easy layups. I was sitting on the couch going, recover, recover. Like this is basketball 101, and I'm sure he's gassed out there. He's a big guy, but there have been too many situations like that with Owen this season. I think it was against Indiana. It might have been Nebraska. There was a time he missed a layup and he wanted a foul, and he was jogging back, and it resulted in an easy transition layup for Nebraska, and you just can't allow that. And I think Fran started to get a little fed up the other night against UCLA. Owen only played, I think, 19 something minutes, 20 minutes. And
There were a lot of movie minutes in that game,
a
right?
lot of Mulvey
A
minutes.
lot of movie minutes.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing in the world to tweet the sirens with early Riley Mulvey minutes. I really enjoy that. But he did play. Where is he at? Well, a lot. He played 13 minutes. Played 13 minutes. And then there's the issue of, oh, you want
More
to light.
minutes than Dembele.
Right. Yeah,
That
that's
game.
true. That's true. You want to
Anyway.
light fire under somebody's ass and put Chris Tajo in, and then he gets beat off the dribble. He has like he just has these physical tools to go up and get a rebound, but he doesn't have I think the IQ, the basketball IQ yet, or the anticipatory defense to be
Yeah.
what people want him to be on the court, and that results in fouls, that results in layups. And something that Fran has routinely said about Tajo, and I agree, is that he's going to be really good. When those things click, he's got the physical tools to be really, really good. And what did I say? So I had multiple people tell me he could start this year, but he hasn't put it together yet. That's the issue there for him. And then you don't have a guy who was a key rotational piece early on in the season in Cooper Koch, right? Like that's a body that helps take, some of the weight off a guy like Josh Dix, take some of the minutes off a guy like Peyton Sanford, Price Sanford. And you know, the if you do make that change in the starting five. My opinion at the beginning of the season was the starting five should be Thelwell, Dix, Seydou, Peyton Sanford, and Owen Freeman. I don't think Fran trusts Seydou right now for whatever reason, whether it's health, whether it's whatever. He was really mad at him at the end of the Iowa State game, if I'm remembering correctly. There was that weird moment where he's like, I guess he's still hurt. So there's something off there, in my opinion. Maybe that's been rectified. Seydou did play 20 minutes the other night. So maybe you start both the Sanford brothers because at least they're big and long to a certain degree, right? They're not 6 feet tall, and this has nothing to do with Brock Harding's effort. I want to make that very clear. He's just small, and that's what you signed up for, and now you're reaping what you sowed by bringing him in. And again, not saying he's not Big Ten talent. We really liked him off the bench last year, and I think that's the best spot for him on this team. But there are just too many glaring issues with this team right now, especially in terms of inconsistency defensively, and I think that's what it really all comes down to.
I
Yeah.
wonder, sorry, Adam, I just interject this. Like with the Harding thing, is it also exacerbated by the fact that Iowa just hasn't had a good answer at the four this year? Like that a guy down there that can rebound and, back. I think what I'm getting at is when you play Harding, there's an expectation that everybody else is going to have to pick things up on defense, I think, to cover for that. And I don't think Iowa doesn't have a really good option at the four right now to help do that. You'd hope Logi could be that guy or Tajo, I think. And they're not quite there for various reasons. So I think Iowa's got some deficiencies on defense and rebounding, which we haven't talked about a lot, but this is not a good rebounding team. And that's hurt them a ton this year. And I think just the interplay of the struggles there, and then that there's less cover for Harding, and so those flaws that Adam pointed out, I think get even more emphasized and just put even more pressure on Freeman. And like Eliot said, he's having those get lapses and not getting back enough. So it's a cascading effect, it seems like, partially.
There are these flashes from Logi that we see from time to time. It's like, whoa, that's athletic. Whoa, that guy's strong. Whoa. But again, inconsistency. This is a point that I wanted to make regarding having Logi on the floor and why I think putting Thelwell in the starting lineup was better for everybody involved. Because Logi can play the four and the five. And that allows you to put Owen on the bench and put Logi in there in relief minutes. But what you need is that consistency on the boards, consistency protecting the rim. And it's kind of the same with Chris, whereas Logic was forced in there because he had to play early last year. And now you're expecting some of that growth and then not seeing it tangibly. One of the things that drives me nuts about Logi in these last, I think, 2 or 3 games, he'll get a rebound or he'll get the ball in the paint and he's going up with it no matter what. And there have been multiple occasions. It's like he gets tunnel vision. There's a clear kick out to Price, who is probably, if not the one of the best 3-point shooters on this team, one of the best 3-point shooters in the Big Ten. What does Logi do? He forces it up. Like this is basketball 101, man. And for any guard that play or any guy that played guard in high school, middle school basketball, and you had a guy who was bigger than everybody else, you know what this is like. You're like, where's me the freaking ball? But it's Price Sanford. It's not Eliot Clough, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? So this is that's something that's really frustrating when watching and you need a break when you're in those moments where you need a break, you need a three, you need something to go your way. This is a situation where Logi got to kick the ball out, man. So that's to reiterate that point I made initially. Defense, the main problem. Some of these things on offense aren't working the way they should be.
Yeah, Logi has the lowest assist rate of anybody in Iowa's rotation on offense, 5.5%. So like once every 20 plays, he'll have an assist when he's on the floor. Hashtag not great, Bob. Yeah, and what was I looking at? Oh yeah, with Traore, it does seem like he is not really put in position to succeed the way that we see him at his best. And when he's at his best, he is sharing the floor with Drew Thelwell, right? Anchoring that sort of three-quarter press or the 1-2-2 or all the different ways that Iowa uses that pressure. But even in that second half against UCLA, they're forcing 10%, 10-second violations. They're forcing shot clock violations. And it's because they're using that pressure, right? They're using that long athleticism. And even like that's putting Bryce or Brock Harding in position to succeed too, because he's able to, sort of provide a little bit of that pressure, that shit stirring, for lack of a better term,
He can use his
in that.
quickness, right? He can use
Yeah,
his
yeah.
quickness, and that's his strength defensively.
Yeah, absolutely. And so and you see that sort of bear out in his, steal rate, which is second best on the team next to, surprise, Drew Thelwell. And so you want them up there on that point with Seydou, right? You want them to use that athleticism, that athleticism that Lodgy has too, because you don't see that defensive prowess from Lodgy as a help defender, right? You don't see him sort of use that size in the post where you really want him to, right? Like we're talking about 6'8", 255, and just doesn't show up when, if Owen's doing something else on defense. And so that is also really difficult because if you can't trust him within 5 feet of the paint on defense, where are you going to trust him? And it's too bad because everything that he flashes, including in that Iowa State game, his jumper actually looks pretty good. He's hitting 43% of his threes, guys, for the season. Like he
I
has
want to
the
see
exact
him shoot
same.
more.
Yeah, yeah. He has the exact same three-point shooting numbers as Cooper Koch, 9 for 21. Right. And so I think at the beginning of the season, we all thought Cooper Koch and Ladji Dembele would have the exact same deep shooting numbers, right? Two exactly similar players, but they do miss Koch, especially with Peyton out for however long that's going to be. And all we know, I think, unless we've gotten some updates, I think all we know is it's going to be a while. Have we heard anything more?
I think it's day to day is what Fran
Okay.
said. He didn't have anything post game. We'll learn more today. We get Fran
Yeah.
at 1:15. So, one more thing I want to say about Seydou too is he's kind of earned that relegation to the bench offensively in my mind. He hasn't been impactful on the offensive side of the floor either. For as much as and I think part of that right now is the lack of flow because there were moments where we saw him and it was like, whoa. I mean, the alley-oop against Utah State and Kansas City was like, that's exactly what Iowa needed. Some of that athleticism, a lob threat, etc. And since then, I've seen him try to ISO opposing defenders. Seydou, you got this is not the offense to do that, right? You got to the move the ball. Excuse me, the ball's got to pop. You got to move the ball, right? Seen too much of that. I think if he's going to be anything, I think in that sort of reserve offensive role, he needs to be a knockdown 3-point shooter from the corner, especially. We haven't seen that either. Um, so those are my misgivings with Seydou offensively, and I think Fran his patience might be wearing a little thin on that front as well as to why he hasn't seen the floor much. But Fran has said, and I wrote an article about this. Fran has said that he wants to see Seydou on the floor, get Seydou more minutes. So, and with Koch out, you're kind of gonna have to. And if there was a game to get him those minutes to get him into a flow offensively, it was UCLA, it was Wisconsin, it was Indiana. So, still working on that. I'd like to. And Minnesota's largely bad, so this might be the game to figure it out, considering you're at home. But I think they're 1-6 in the Big Ten with their one win against Michigan at home. So the home advantage in the Big Ten right
It's
now is wild. But yeah, that's where I'm at with Seydou and getting him on the court now.
the one thing that we saw from Seydou early in the season was there was one play in particular. He gets a post or a pass in the post, turns around immediately, just hits a like 15-foot like a fadeaway or a turnaround or what have you. And if that were part of his game with any regularity, that helps quite a bit because that, sort of forces the defender, as far away from the bucket as Traore wants to be. But we haven't really seen that since then. He is, along with, again, Laji Dembele, the only guy on Iowa's team that shoots under 50%, or not the only guy, but the only big who shoots under 50% on two-pointers. And we see him in situations where he's not pressing, and all of a sudden that 6'7", 220 looks a little bit generous when he's trying to defend in the post. And you sort of see why he was at Manhattan to begin with. And so those sort of defensive limitations, when you're not using him to his strengths, become a little bit more apparent. And I get why the staff is like, but again, I think this is a situation where you need to explore what he does well and lean into that. And this staff knows how to do that. We've seen him do it over and over, and this is, year one of a guy who's still a sophomore, right? But at the same time, in terms of actually turning this season around, when the staff thinks that they need to get him on the floor, but they also don't really know how to use him to his advantage, and you could say that about, quite a few guys on this team. Um, yeah, a lot easier said than done in terms of getting this unit out of the ditch, for lack of a better term.
Okay, now that we've gotten all that basketball talk out of the way, which, by the way, if you're feeling some type of way right now, go ahead and drop that in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking. Is our assessment of getting Harding out of the starting lineup correct? Like, what do you think? Who should start right now? Let us know in the comments. And same thing for women's basketball. How do they right the ship there um, for the women?
And
Now,
in fact, in the comments, let us know who you would start instead of Brock Harding, or if you would start Brock Harding. I want names. I want some names. I want starting fives, because there's so many different answers you could go with, and you could say that about the women too. So
right.
yeah, let us know what you want your starting fives to be, men's or women's, in the comments. We'll be reading. We'll be replying.
And if you're if you're a premium subscriber, we're definitely going to be talking about that here shortly. Um, so on to football now, because we haven't potted since the addition of Sam Phillips. Ross and I got that one handled. If you want to listen to that, you can check it out. It's in on our YouTube channel, all of our podcasting platforms. We haven't potted since then. And since then, we've learned that I almost said Rob Gronowski instead of Mark Gronowski. I haven't done Gronkowski one time, but I get Mark Gronowski has or will have surgery. I haven't heard if he has had surgery. We knew it was coming within the few weeks from that release. That came out on a Friday, which was that was the peak Friday afternoon news dump right there. Way to go, Weitzel. He's on his game there. But this is something that I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I had heard about a little bit. I talked with our friends Jackrabbit Illustrated, Matt Tollefson. He was previously on Cornstalks and Sports Talk, my radio show, before he being here with Rivals. And having those connections is awesome, and able to talk with him. Hopefully, we're going to talk with him before the season starts about Gronowski and what he could bring to Iowa. But had gotten a little bit of inclination that he had gotten hurt. Wasn't aware that surgery was going to be necessary, but it sounds like it's upper body. And additionally, I think this is the main thing for fans, is that it's just too eerily similar to the Cade McNamara saga, both when he came in and the following season, where he misses the spring, he's still anointed the starter, and it doesn't look very good. And I completely understand that trepidation, completely understand that angst, completely understand that fear, because he was the anointed one, right? And people started doing the same thing to Gronowski, two-time national champ, essentially the FCS Heisman, winning the Walter Payton Award in 2023. And I can attest he's very legit. Ross and I were hyping up this edition when they brought him in. And one of the reasons that Ross made sure to highlight, so this is on you, Ross, is that he was going to get the spring. Oh no. Turns out he's not getting the spring. He's recovering from surgery. Will likely not be back until June. I think a lot of people. It is an upper body. It is a shoulder thing that we know for sure. But what I will say is it's not Cade McNamara, right? Like these are two very different injuries. This is a guy who's moving up from FCS. This is a guy who's had to earn everything he's gotten. Will presumably have to do the same thing and compete with Brendan Sullivan. He's not coming in and competing with Deacon Hill or Joe Labus. He's competing with Brendan Sullivan and Hank Brown. So I'm still of the mind that this is an excellent addition. This is still a positive thing, but it's taken away a little bit, right, by the fact that he will miss the spring. So that's where I'm at with that. I understand the trepidation, I understand the fear, but man, Mark Gronowski is legit, guys. I will stand pat on that. That'll be the hill I die on.
Yeah, you mentioned that he had to sort of earn everything he got, and he's a guy that got recruited by Iowa out of high school. And look what he had to do to actually earn the offer from Iowa. He had to go to South Dakota State and win a national championship. Like
Two of them.
that is
Two.
two of them. Yeah. So, talk about earning it. But he's a kid who I say kid only because he's half my age. He's a guy who has just incredible production, incredible leadership. I mean, everything that came out of is it Brookings, where that school is?
Brookings, yep.
How about that? Everything that came out of the Jacks was um, incredibly appreciative, right? It like almost reverent in the way that they talked about Gronowski. Um, supporting whatever he did next. And I think they understood there that, his ceiling is higher than anything that's going to happen in South Dakota, right? And so, he is leaving on the best imaginable terms, which is a little bit different from, things that we've seen from quarterbacks coming to Iowa City, and or leaving Iowa City for that matter. And, you know, has that history of playmaking, throwing to guys who are going pro in something other than sports, on top of that, right? Not leaning on NFL talent around him.
But but they had dudes at South Dakota State.
Oh yeah, yeah,
They had
100%.
dudes.
And you know how you have to know how to throw to dudes, right? Like you have to know how to like throw guys open, play to their strengths, and we saw that. And at the very least, this is a situation where he will, as you mentioned, he will be competing against multiple guys who have started in Power Four competition, right? He's going to be competing against, guys who have things that they offer. And at the very least, while he's injured, he will be in Iowa City. He will be in the same room as Tim Lester. He's not going to be getting those reps with the ones. Those are probably going to be going to Brendan Sullivan, and that is great for Brendan Sullivan. Got to say that because this is also going to be his first spring with Tim Lester, essentially. So we are going to see Iowa's QB room have the healthiest competition in God knows how long. I'm not even sure how it's going to like. I'm not even sure I would wager a guess as to who wins it at this point, just because we're so far away from when Gronowski is even expected back on the field. Right? We need to see that that surgery is going to be successful, that that rehab is on pace, and all that. But this is a situation where they can reliably and let's even throw Jackson Stratton in there too. Why not? Right? I mean,
No.
he has starting
No.
experience. Strictly for checking off the box of starting experience. Four quarterbacks with that, or essentially, or like three incumbent QBs plus Gronowski, who has the FCS experience. Right? That's all I'm getting at there.
Okay.
That's
That's fair. All right. All right.
yeah. So this is a situation where unless a tornado hits the QB room and only the QB room, which is meteorologically implausible, um, this is a situation where Iowa fans don't have to worry about a Cade McNamara situation because, even if the worst case scenario happens and Gronowski's arm just like falls off during surgery, they'll be okay. That's not what they want, right? The quarterback room will not be as good, but they have people who know what to do as a starting quarterback. Three of them, as a matter of fact. So that part, at the very least, is a safety net that Iowa didn't have with McNamara. And then on top of that, just the fact that Iowa's trainers are okay with this. This was understood to be a football injury, and trainers know how to correct football injuries. Like this isn't a thing where we don't know what's going on, and it turns out it's, uh, lower scapular blah blah. They know what's going on, right? And so it's not great again for Gronowski, and it really adds a lot more uncertainty to what the competition's going to be. Because if he were healthy, I'd say, oh well, yeah, that's QB1 right there. But I think when we get to September, Iowa's QB situation will have, not only a little bit more certainty, but also the depth that fans can actually have just a smidgen, an iota of confidence in the passing game going into the season for the first time in Lord knows how long. Ross, would you agree with that situation or assessment?
I would, yeah. I think that, that is the silver lining, I guess, to Gronowski being out for spring is that it gives Lester, yeah, well, Lester, it gives him more time to work with Sullivan, both Sullivans, and Stratton and Hank Brown, and get them more reps, more time, get them better equipped to if they do have to play next fall. They're in a better position to do so at an effective level for Iowa's offense. So, I guess that's the silver lining if you want to find one. As far as is the injury and the move overall, I did a premium article this weekend rating Iowa's work in the transfer portal, and the guys they brought in so far, which we understand they're not done in the transfer portal. They're still going to be looking at guys right now. In fact, if there are any available that are fit their needs, and then for sure in April when the portal opens again, they'll be active and trying to address some needs then. But you wanted to look at what they've done so far, and I graded the Gronowski move, and like that's an A move if he's healthy, like we thought he was, a week ago or 10 days ago when we found out about this injury and the surgery. So you do have to knock it down a little bit, and you can see the grades and the write up. Subscribe to Hawkeye Beacon, and you have to knock it down because part of that grade, the initial grade, is built into you're getting Gronowski for the full 9 months prior to next fall season. You're getting him for spring practice. You're getting him for fall practice, the summer workouts kind of, in between. He's getting all that time with Lester and the playbook and the other receivers and developing chemistry with those guys. And, now that is all kind of on pause. He can still look, obviously he's going to be working with the playbook and breaking down film and everything, but he's not going to be throwing to guys for a while. He's not going to be developing that chemistry with the receivers and the tight ends until this summer. And, he can still succeed doing that. And, I'm thinking he probably will, but it's not the ideal situation that it looked like, the optimal situation that, it's like, okay, this is great. I was adding this, really good quarterback that has a ton of experience, a ton of success, and they're going to get him, he's going to have all the time he could get to bed into the offense, to figure things out, to get that chemistry going. And it's like, well, crap. Now he's got half of that time, essentially. He's got half of that chemistry building. It's like, well, that's not as great, obviously. So.
And the revelation of the injuries sort of also explains a little bit about why he didn't go to the NFL draft, right? Because that was also sort of on the table for him as, for what he's going to do this year. And then, so when he decided, oh, by the way, it's going to be transfer portal. Oh, by the way, it's going to be Iowa. A lot of us were, a lot of fans were like, oh, wow, how about that? And now it makes a little bit more sense why he, is at the very least delaying the NFL situation for another, year, because a lot of NFL teams are going to look at that and say, you know, uh, this is not something that we need to spend a draft pick on. And I get it, right? But at the same time, if Gronowski is a professional quarterback, lower P professional quarterback, if he has a professional approach to it, this is going to be a situation for him to prove it without being on the field, right? If his approach is professional, if his film study is professional, if his playbook and integration with Lester is, if he handles that professionally, then this is a situation where one, he's cleared for practice, which is again expected to be in June, which again, this is not a Caden McNamara situation because that was July into August into September, especially in year one with them. So at the very least, getting on board and into the program with two healthy legs in June, at the very least, gives you 2 to 3 months to throw to ones and twos and to start to develop that rhythm within this Leicester offense, which depends a lot on timing and on precision and on rhythm with receivers, right? He's not stepping in the middle of August. It's going to be June. And, insofar as individual weeks of practice matter, and, like bowl prep matters, and that's just a few weeks of practice, right? Insofar as that little practice window matters, it's going to matter a great deal for Gronowski getting in tune with the Leicester offense. So, again, this isn't a situation where you got to panic. This isn't a situation where he's not in position to succeed. As long as that timeline's correct, I think he is in position to actually earn and win this QB1 role, but it will be a competition. And Sullivan will have a baked in advantage at the very least to start. And how much that baked in advantage matters, we'll see. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. And if everything turns out well, with the surgery, with the rehab, with the integration in the offense, then Iowa taking a chance on this guy who just had, what everyone's calling a normal football injury to his shoulder, and their training staff was okay with this. If that chance pays off, Iowa will have its best quarterback under center since probably CJ Beathard.
Wrap it up with this point that I wanted to make regarding his return in June is that no, he won't have the spring. He won't have those organized activities where he'll be on the field with these guys. But what he will have is Logan Jones. He'll have Jacob Gill. He'll have Addison Ostranga, some of these guys who have been there, done that with this offense that he can work through some of these things with in the offseason. Maybe not in the facility, maybe not with Tim Lester, but these are guys who have been part of this offense and can teach him, walk him through things, and he'll be in the film room. He'll be in these meetings, right? So this is something to note that he won't be completely off campus. He won't be at Northwestern like Brendan Sullivan was. He'll be a guy that will be able to be ingratiated with this team, with this culture. And if I did have to bet, Adam, I know you said you wouldn't be a little reluctant. I'm still putting money on Gronowski as the starter. That's what I would do. The amount of money that they invested into him, yeah, yeah, he's gonna
Yeah,
be the starter if I had to guess. But still got to get that surgery. So we will
yeah,
see
yeah.
how it all.
Their music sings a little, or their money sings a little bit louder than mine. Well,
Yeah,
we'll put
yeah,
it that
right.
way.
Yeah. All right. We will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast brought to you by Iowa.Rivals.com. Not a premium subscriber yet. You can do that today. Iowa.Rivals.com/subscribe. Big Iowa Junior Day coming up. We'll be previewing that. Of course, Ross's article grading how things have shaken out in the portal thus far. Our continued coverage of the portal, men's basketball, women's basketball, recruiting. Big news coming this week on the recruiting front, so stay tuned for that. We'll have premium content there. Of course, don't forget to subscribe, leave that rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and if you're on YouTube, drop a like, drop a comment. How you feeling about those starting lineups? How you feeling about Gronowski? But for now, my name is Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby, and we will see you next time.